Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good Tvach Shavua Tov. We are learning Mishnah Yishkalim, Perek Ches, Chapter 8, Mishnah Ches, Mishnah 8. Okay. So just let you know, we're gonna need a picture here very soon. It's the picture of the Mizbeach, of the altar. Mm-hmm. It's important to keep in mind. You see, there's a ramp leading up to the top of the altar. That's going to be a big part of the discussion. The ramp leading up to the altar. Now, Eivari HaTamid. Now, we know that there are different karbanis that are brought that are brought. I mean, you have a carbon tamid that's brought every day. It's a burnt offering that's brought every day. You've got on Shabbos and Yontif and Yontif, you have Musafin, the additional sacrifices. So the Mishnah reads like this. Eivari HaTamid. The limbs of the tamid, of the daily offering. Now, as I mentioned before, the daily offering is an olah. It's a burnt offering. The whole thing's burnt. But you don't just take the whole animal and put it in the fire. You cut it up into large pieces called eivarim, we call limbs. Now, so eivari hatamid, the limbs of the carbon tamid, of the daily sacrifice. Nitanim mechatzi kevesh ulamata b'mayrav. They are placed halfway, call it halfway down the ramp to the west. Now, what's happening is like this. Let me read to you. There was a ramp on the south side of the Mizbeach, of the altar leading to its top. The ramp was 32 amas long, 32 cubits long, and 16 amas wide, 16 cubits wide. Call it about 64 long, 32 wide. After the tamid was slaughtered and its blood was thrown on the altar, the animal was cut into large pieces. When this was completed, however, it was still not time to place the limbs on the altar's fire. It was too early. It was too early to do it. The limbs were therefore left on the ramp of the altar while the Kohanim recited the Shema and its blessings, and also performed the services of the Ketores, the incense, and the menorah, and the lighting of the menorah. The limbs were then taken from the ramp up to the top of the altar and thrown onto the fire burning there. So you've got a process. You shech the animal, that's the carbon tamid. You throw its blood onto the altar. The Kohanim, whose job for that day is to carry these limbs to the Mizbeach, they carry it to the Mizbeach and they put it on the bottom half of the Mizbeach. They leave it there because it's too early to actually burn. They say Shema, means they daven. They say Shema and the blessings of Shema, they go along with that. The menorah is taken care of, the Ketores is taken care of, and then they come back and take the limbs up all the way to the top of the altar where the fire is, and they throw it onto the fire. So the point of the Mishnah, when it says like this, Nitanim mechatzi kevesh, they're put from half of the ramp, ulamata, and down, b'mayrav in the west. So in this picture here, okay, I hope you can see it well, but you see that you have you've got, this is the bottom half of the kevesh, right? You can see the bottom half of it, right? And then you have the west side of that half and the east side of that half. Okay, so the point is that the limbs are placed again on the bottom half of the ramp on the western side. That's the Mishnah saying. That's what happens to the limbs of the carbon tamid, of the morning daily sacrifice, and we're talking about the morning here. The morning daily sacrifice, this is where they are placed. Vishal Musafin. Now, when we talk about the limbs of the Musaf offerings, that means on the Musaf offerings brought on Shabbos and Yontif, they are Nitanim Echatzi Kevesh Ulamata b'Mizrach. They are placed again on the bottom half of the ramp, but this time on the east side of the bottom half of the ramp. Okay, now the Rosh Chodeshim, and when it comes to the offerings of Rosh Chodesh, which were also a Musaf offering, there we say Nitanim al Karkev Mizbeach B'Lamayla. They are placed on the ramp above the ledge of the Mizbeach. Okay, so it's going to kind of be hard to see this in the picture, but the bottom line is here that the limbs of the Musaf offering of Rosh Chodesh are put on the top half of the ramp.
All right.
They're on the top half of the ramp. The Mishnah describes it as the area above the Karkov. The Karkov was what we actually call the sovev, which was an indentation on the mizbeach on the side, so that the kohanim could walk around. It was like a ledge to walk around. So the point here is that the top half of the ramp is the area that is above that ledge. That's what the Mishnah means. And it's interesting to note that the limbs of the reason they placed higher up the ramp, the reason the limbs of the Rosh Chodesh were placed higher up the ramp than other offerings is in order to publicize the sanctification of that day as Rosh Chodesh. We want people to know it's the beginning of the month. So by putting it above everything and making it more visible, or kind of giving it a certain higher status, that stressed the fact that today is Rosh Chodesh and to know the new month has begun. Now, the Mishnah also mentioned that you have the limbs of the Tamid on one side and limbs of the Musafin on the other side. Apparently, we don't want them to get mixed up. Why is that? Because the halacha is that the first offering of the day is supposed to be the Tamid, the carbon Tamid, the daily sacrifice that's brought in the morning and the afternoon. That morning one is supposed to be the first one of the day. And the afternoon one is supposed to be the last one of the day. So if we're going to get them mixed up, you may land up offering the Musafim offering before the Tamid offering. And therefore, we make sure that they have their own specific places on the ramp so as not to get mixed up. Okay, that is the end of this discussion of the Mishnah about the limbs. Now the Mishnah goes into something completely different. If you remember, the name of this Mishnah is, you should remember, we say it every day, Shkolim. We haven't discussed Shkolim in a very long time. Been a lot of other discussions going on.
We go out on a limb here.
Okay, now the Mishnah continues. Gets back to a discussion about Shkolim. Shkolim v'abikurim. The mitzvah, the obligation, the mitzvah of giving the half shekel towards the communal sacrifices. And bikurim. Bikurim are the first ripened fruits. We're supposed to set aside, bring them to the Beis HaMikdash, put them at the altar, at the side of the altar, and then it goes to the Kohanim. Ein noegen el b'fnei habayis. They only are relevant. They only have to be observed in front of the house. Meaning, if there's a Beis HaMikdash, then there's a mitzvah to have. Then the mitzvah is there. The mitzvah is there. That's when you have to give a half a shekel, right? But if there's no Beis HaMikdash, what are you giving a half a shekel for? Right? There's no sacrifices. The bikurim, which theoretically maybe could still have sanctity, there's a pasuk, there's a verse we derive that it only applies. You only have the mitzvah when you can bring it to the house of Hashem, which is what the mitzvah says you should do. Okay. Aval, so those two mitzvahs without a Beis HaMikdash do not apply. Aval Meiser Dagan, the tithing of our grain, right? The fact that we separate Truma and Meiser for the Kohen and the Levi, right? That mitzvah, Umeiser Behema, and tithing animals, right? From our cattle, we're supposed to of the sheep and the cattle and the goats, we're supposed to sanctify. We're supposed to set aside every 10th. And that animal is sanctified that you have to bring it to Yerushalayim and you eat it. Were it to get a blemish, so couldn't be a carbon anymore, you could eat it where you are. But the mitzvah of Meiser is to take that 10th animal, at sanctity, bring it to Yerushalayim, offer it as a sacrifice, and eat the meat there. V'abachayres, or the sanctity applied to firstborn animals. Again, firstborn cattle, sheep, goats have a sanctity that they have to be given to the Kohen, and the Kohen takes it and the Kohen at the Beis HaMikdash eats it. If it were to get a blemish and it couldn't be a sacrifice anymore, it still goes to the Kohen, and he keeps it and eats it for himself. These mitzvahs, noyagin ben b'pnei habayis, ben shalom b'pnei habayis. These mitzvahs apply as well, whether you have the Beis HaMikdash, whether you don't. So nowadays, we know we separate Trumas and Maasros. We don't give it to the Kohen or the Levi, but we separate it. Now, interestingly, what about the tithing of animals? So the Bartanur brings down this. The Gemara relates that the rabbis later decreed that people should no longer separate the animal meiser. They said, don't do it. The rabbis were concerned that since there is no longer any temple in which to offer these animals, the owners might use them while waiting for them to develop a blemish which is forbidden. Meaning, if you go ahead and you tithe the animal, right? So what's going to happen? What's going to happen is there's no Beis HaMikdash anymore, right? No Beis HaMikdash anymore. So what are you going to have to do? You have to wait for it to get a blemish. The problem is, while you're waiting for it to get a blemish, you may end up using it in some way, and that's usher to do. That's forbidden to do. So therefore, the Rabbanan decreed that we don't practice this mitzvah. You don't separate it. The only thing is that that's not going to be a solution when it comes to the bachar, the firstborn animal, because the firstborn animal is kaddish, is holy once it's born. There's no designation to it. There's nothing you do to bring up to sanctify it. It's automatic. So again, it applies, but there's really not much you're able to do with it. Not much you're able to do with it. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you do with this animal, but the mitzvah still applies. Okay, now the Mishnah continues and says the following. Hamakdish shkalim bikurim. All right, so we just established there's no mitzvah of giving the half shekel without the Beis Hamikdash, and there's no mitzvah of bikurim, of the first ripened fruits to bring to the Beis Hamikdash without the Beis Hamikdash. What if you decided to take money and say, this money is a shekel. I want it to be for a shekel. I'm designating it as a shekel. There's no Beis Hamikdash. I don't have to designate it as a shekel, but that's what I'm doing it. I'm designating it as a shekel. What happens to it? Or I take these fruits, the first ripened fruits, and I say, these are bikurim. I declare them bikurim. Anything happens to them? Hamakdish shkalim bikurim. Somebody who sanctifies the half shekel or the first fruits to be the money as a shekel, the first fruits to be bikurim. Harei zeh kodesh. It's holy. It works. You don't have a mitzvah, but at the end of the day, you can still give it that status. And what do you do with it? What do you do with it? So the answer is the fruit must be left to rot, and the coins must be hidden away where they will not be found and used. Throw them into the ocean. That's a typical example. You can't use it. Got to make, and you can't leave it around either. Now, then the Mishnah concludes, Rabbi Shimon says, Ha'omer bikurim kodesh, einon kodesh. Rabbi Shimon argues and says, if somebody declares fruit as bikurim, it's not kodesh. The fact that the pasuk says that you have to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash according to Rabbi Shimon doesn't only mean there is no mitzvah without the Beis Hamikdash, but there is just no thing. There's no way to do it. There's no way to create that status without the Beis Hamikdash. That he says regarding the bikurim. Doesn't say that regarding the shkalim. And that's the halacha. That's the halacha. Right. So at the end of the day, according to Rabbi Shimon, if you go ahead and you say these fruits should be Shimon Omer, Ha'omer bikurim kodesh, if somebody says these fruits should be sanctified as bikurim, einon kodesh, they don't become sanctified. The pasuk says you got to bring it to the house of Hashem. Without that, not only is no mitzvah, there's just no such thing. You can't do it. That is, but Reb Shimon doesn't mention anything about the shkalim, which would mean the shkalim. You could still do it. And Bartanura says, Allah is like Reb Shimon. All right, with this, we have now completed Masech Shkalim. Mazel Tov. Mitzvah Hashem, tomorrow we will start Masech Yoma. Have a wonderful day.
What are we going to?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yoma.